Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Rewriting the Rings of Power. With this video, I want to demonstrate that obviously this show could have been much better than it is, but rather than tell you how I would have done the show as a whole, I want to demonstrate that the writing could have been far better, even within the show Amazon decided to make. Better enough, perhaps, to make it watchable and even, hopefully, enjoyable. If you want to see how a Second Age show probably should have been done, check out Tolkien Untangled's explanation of his version. It's incredible. My goal here is not to do that, but rather to literally rewrite this show down to the dialogue, leaving it as unchanged as possible in terms of overall story beats. The classic criticism people get when criticizing a show is, then why don't you write it better? And then, even when they attempt to do so, it is usually an outline of how they wish the story went, to which people cry, but actually writing the dialogue and scenes is much harder than a story outline. To which I say, you're right, but that doesn't mean it couldn't be done. I am here to do exactly that. I'm preempting this particular criticism and challenging myself to justify my immense disdain for this show by writing everything down to the dialogue. This is legitimately a 28-page Google Doc that I wrote for this. But without further ado, let's get into it. Okay. Step one is to identify the main arcs of the show and the main characters as they're set up in episode 1. Obviously, our first character is Galadriel. The arc set up in episode 1 as written by Amazon is her hunting the frozen wastes for traces of Sauron because Sauron killed her brother. She's on some sort of revenge quest. The real arc for the whole show is probably going to be something about learning to be wise, I guess. They're trying to set up some sort of long haul. How does she become the person we know in the Lord of the Rings movies? Which for people who are fans of, who've read the books and know the lore, it's unlikely that Galadriel was a petulant child at the time that this show takes place. And even to people who are not fans of the source material, when you make a character arc, you have to make the character likable but flawed, which is something that they have not done a good job of doing with Galadriel. She is not likable at all. She's pretty much just flawed, which makes it very difficult to watch her on screen. It's kind of just annoying when she's talking, which is unfortunate because Galadriel is an incredible character, and I don't think it's any fault to 𝘓𝘰𝘳𝘥 either. You know, she may not be the right actress for the part, I don't know, but you know, a lot of this also probably comes down to the direction, who's telling her how to be. She's got to have more emotional range in this show as a main character. And the other problem, of course, is how she's written. The second main arc is going to be Elrond's arc, which, according to what Amazon wrote in this first episode, you know, the sense you get is he wants to be a big boy politician, but he's only a herald, whatever that means. And his main struggle seems to be leadership versus friendship, the duties of leadership versus what it means to, you know, care about the people around you, which is a fine enough, you know, concept if you can really dig into that. Then we have Eärendil and Bronwyn, which is the classic forbidden love story. Eärendil is surrounded by racists who hate elves and racist elves who hate the people who fought alongside Morgoth, who live in Mordor. Times have changed since then, obviously, but the elves still remember and they harbor a grudge. Eärendil should be kind of the middleman of this, who is our relatable character who realizes that both sides maybe are right and wrong at the same time, and we can follow and relate with that as the story goes on. And then we have the Harfoots, who are wandering around. A guy falls out of the sky into their camp. They kind of have nothing to do with anything. They're fine, they're cute, I guess. But even up to episode 6 where we're at now, I don't understand what the point of having them in here is, besides the obvious cash grab of having, oh look, hobbits and oh look, Gandalf. I'm sorry, did I say Gandalf? I mean the stranger. With the main arcs identified, we're going to use these to guide our decisions of how we rewrite these scenes. We're going to rewrite with these arcs in mind at all times. So let's jump into the very first scene that we start with, which is the prologue. The prologue. The definitely not like the Fellowship of the Ring prologue, where the exact same character gives disembodied voiceover over a big lore dump. Now, my first problem with the scene begins with Galadriel getting bullied by elf children. This is entirely out of character for elves. It's important to maintain consistency in the types of characters we're creating here. Elves are supposed to be ethereal, wise, you know. According to Tolkien, they have a quick onset of mental maturity, which to me does not sound like they would go around bullying each other and fighting as kids. And the fact that the Kinslaying was such an enormous event leads me to believe that elves weren't going around fist fighting in Valinor over petty squabbles. Instead, let's have a scene with Galadriel making her boat, setting it afloat, and then it floats for a time and then sinks. We see it swallowed into the river, and then Finrod will appear to comfort her. Evening, beneath a tree. Stars shine in the sky as Telperion waxes and Lorleen wanes. Do you know why some ships sink while others sail? Why? It is the heart of its captain which determines its doom. A foolhardy captain soon loses her way, allowing fears and desires to cloud her mind, only to find herself adrift in a tempest. But a wise captain, who knows herself, will see afar the guiding light, and no squall will ever consume her. But how can she know herself? And then Finrod can lean down and whisper, "That is for her to discover." Now, one, we get rid of this stupid, clunky rock metaphor, which made no fucking sense to me the first time I listened to it. Why do boats float and rocks sink? Like, what? These are supposed to be elves. These are supposed to be incredibly intelligent beings, and they're using a ham-fisted metaphor to try to explain this a relatively simple concept. Like, with this, at least Finrod's saying what he means. He's saying, don't let fears and desires cloud your mind, or you will end up lost in life. But if you learn to know yourself, you will see afar the guiding light. And he, as he says this, he can point up to the stars, emphasizing the elves' reverence for Varda's stars. And that's how she will learn to be who she is. And Galadriel says, how can she know that? And Finrod basically says, that's for you to discover. That's your journey. This both references the universal lesson that it is not the tool but the wielder that determines fate, but it also brings in the future actions of Feanor, one who had fire in his soul but not the long foresight to keep his way, which would end up leading to the doom of the Noldor and the first Kinslaying. It also sets up Galadriel's arc for this series of letting go of her fears and strong desires, the more Feanorian parts of her spirit, which keep her from being able to let go of the threat of Sauron and the fear that entails, as she discovers herself and her Fea overtakes her 𝘓𝘯𝘳 in the normal fashion of elves. Yes, this is something she maybe already learned in the company of Melian and Doriath, but in the context of this show, it does have the potential to be a powerful and relatable arc for a viewer. The next part of this, the exposition about Morgoth and the trees, is fine. If Ungoliant can't be included for rights reasons, fine. But if Ungoliant could have been included, that probably would have been a really great visual to have a giant spider consuming these trees. So we can leave that fairly unchanged. However, rather than explaining that all the elves just dipped out of Valinor on the warpath the second the light got taken out of the trees, perhaps we can remain a little more consistent with the lore, again, without breaking into Silmarillion territory, because it looks like they're running up against a lot of rights issues in this show. So in my whole rewrite of this, I have attempted to maintain the same level of kind of distance from direct references and kind of kept things a little more subtle. So instead, let's have Galadriel explain as such. So when the great foe Morgoth stole the very light of our home, a large host of our kin sought to reclaim it. To that end, we sailed across great seas and braved grinding ice to reach a land wreathed in shadow. Then we get to the battle scene, which honestly is pretty freaking cool. It's probably the best visual part of the series so far. You know, the darkness, everything, because there's not a sun and a moon yet. It's literally just dark. So, you know, the visuals of the fell beast attacking the eagle, very cool. It's honestly the most practical looking fight in the show. And why do these orcs look so much better than the orcs in the rest of the series? Honestly, the orc prosthetics in the whole series are pretty darn good, but these orcs, I don't know, something about them just feels more orc-like. Anyway, it's cool. It can chill as it is. We don't need to change much about that. Then we have this really clunky line about having many words for death. Instead, I would have Galadriel say this. Then we knew death more closely than ever before, and shed tears unnumbered. I mean, come on, writers. This was an obvious opportunity to reference the 𝘊𝘰𝘯𝘪𝘯𝘨𝑒. I don't know why you would not do that when you're clearly referencing that battle or the battles that led up to that battle. So we'll stick with that for Galadriel. Sauron's introduction is honestly visually pretty interesting. I think that can stay as it is. I'm gonna nix Finrod's vendetta quest. You know, in the show, we see Galadriel explaining that Finrod was hunting Sauron when he died, which just isn't true, and there's really no reason to necessarily put that in. I know you can't literally describe what happened because you don't have the rights to Beren and Luthien, but let's have it go like this. Sauron had learned well the evil crafts of his master, and my brother, who sought ever to protect the peoples of Middle-earth, was slain. Then we have Sauron's serial killer symbol. That's fine, it can stay. I think it's a nice visual MacGuffin. I think its introduction could be changed slightly. I think it being on Finrod's body is fine, but there's no need for like a ham-fisted explanation of it. Instead, let's hear simply this. And the dread sorcery of Sauron left its mark, not only on him, but on me. The way this scene goes, when Galadriel says, not only on him, we have the camera show the mark. Boom, seed is planted, everyone understands what's going on. Then she says, but on me. This is where I want to set up a very important plot point, which I believe helps give Galadriel's character better motivation for her arc. She will have prophetic visions, almost in a PTSD type way where she can't really control them, and they begin to control her. This is also accurate to Galadriel's perception of Sauron in the Second Age that led to the founding of Eregion. She knew there was evil happening. This is a thing that is true. But we're gonna blow this up. It wasn't quite as like, I'm having visions of Sauron. But we're gonna blow it up for the purposes of television. These visions can consist of vague shots of like moving shadow, shots of Sauron, shots of land is in the east turning to ruin, shots of Eregion in ruins, flames, screams, just various not great things to be seen pop up in your mind. So when Galadriel says, but on me, we suddenly have it click to the first visual of these visions. Immediately, the viewer understands what Galadriel sees. It helps us connect to her character. We have seen what she has seen. This explains why she's intent on finding Sauron and putting a stop to things before they happen. She is driven by this fear that her visions impress upon her. It also explains why others are understanding of why she fears this, but don't necessarily agree that there is a looming threat. Her foresight is a curse at this point, but she will eventually learn to tame it. Much like the Palantir, she sees what may come to pass, but may draw the wrong conclusions from the information and make unwise decisions due to this. The series will expand on these visions, and pieces of them will become clearer as she becomes better at taming the 𝘓𝘰𝘯𝘪 parts of her spirit. Then we can move on to the end of the prologue, where she's with her company of elves traveling in search of what she sees in her visions. Now we move on to the 𝘓𝘰𝘣𝘆 scene. Climbing the waterfall mountain is fine. Elves are nimble, strong, capable, in bodily feats. So that's cool to see. But damn, give all the elves long hair. Why is there not one male elf with long hair in this whole show? It's just Gil-galad and Adar, and that's pretty much it. Everyone else has got like pompadours and like fuckboy haircuts. It's really weird. It's a shame. Anyway, step 1. Let's try to make Galadriel less of a straight-up asshole. If this scene, as it's written, just paints Galadriel in the worst fucking light ever, it's really terrible. And she should not be a terrible leader. We want her to be a bit lost in her fear and the 𝘓𝘰𝘯𝘪 parts of her spirit, and perhaps a bit blind to how her choices are affecting those around her, but she shouldn't be a caricature. Again, like I said in the beginning, if you're going to set up a character arc for somebody, they have to be likable. The way I wanted to set that up is, rather than having, Thondir look up at Galadriel as she's climbing and be like, I'm angry, as they reach one of the ledges that they're climbing up, perhaps one of the companions slips and nearly falls, and 2 of the other elves must catch and save them. And when they all make it up onto the ledge, they kind of flop onto the ground, catching their breath. And then Thondir looks up to see Galadriel already climbing a ways up the next cliff. Galadriel's drive has put her in a situation where she simply did not notice one of her team nearly falling. She didn't actively ignore her team, she just allowed her desire to get in the way of camaraderie. Her companions can express disappointment in this. This is something where rather than being a blatant asshole, Galadriel's choices have instead put her in a situation where she looks bad. But we understand, and she's not just being mean. As they take their break in this next little scene, and Galadriel pores over her map, her companion can approach her, and the conversation can go something like this. My lady Galadriel, this land drains the very spirit from our flesh. We have survived far worse. Yes, but for how long must we? This company has followed you to the uttermost reaches of these lands, and we have found nothing but empty wastes. I would not ask more than you would willingly give. If this is where our paths diverge, then so be it, though I will be grieved at the parting. And then she marches off. Again, this highlights her drive, but rather than being a straight-up dick, she just doesn't understand why others don't share her fear. Then, when they're crossing the snowstorm, we can skip the clunky fucking scene where somebody falls over and she says, fuck off, we're going anyway. Because we've already set that up in that earlier scene with somebody almost falling off of the cliff. The part where the storm lights up and flashes and reveals that they are actually at the place they were looking for is fine. I think that's neat enough. It's a classic trope. It's like, whoa, are we there yet? Oh, we're already there, kind of thing. Then we cut to the next big scene, inside of the fortress. This whole so evil it's not hot in our torches thing is so weird and clunky, in my opinion. It would get the point across better and more visually if the torches just sputter and go out as soon as they walk into this place. Especially if maybe there's not really a wind. It's not that they're being blown out, it's that they just sputter and disappear. This is where we run into some issues of like not quite knowing what they're trying to set up with the stranger, because they're trying to pretend they're setting up the stranger to be Sauron, but it's not really. And the whole idea of like fire not being hot is how they set up Nori being able to touch the fire around the stranger. But again, I think it's so contrived and dumb that this helps the scene feel less dumb. So I'm going to keep it as I've adjusted it here. Then we have Galadriel punching through a wall for some reason, because she's strong, I guess, but just have her use the butt of her now unlit torch to break it. There's like, why would you punch a wall and then have everyone else break the rest of it down off screen? Just break it down with your torch. There's nobody should be punching through walls. It's just weird. When they enter this area, let's make it clear who is going where. Let's have Galadriel do some leader things, like asking some of the elves to stand guard, tell some of them to go explore a second path, point them in where they're going, be kind of a commander figure here. Then she can tell 𝘓𝘪 to come with her, and they enter the creepy dungeon zone. The dialogue within the creepy dungeon zone could go something like this. What devilry is this? There was a dark sorcery at work here. The air is still heavy with it. Then Galadriel can approach the orc that's inside the wall. Its head and body are coated in snow and dust, and she reaches out to wipe the layer away on its head. Underneath is the mark of Sauron burned into the flesh. Flash to one of her vision images. He was here. Sauron. Perfecting some wicked craft before he fled. There must be more here for keen eyes to find. And then she begins to search, and we cut to the other elves who are searching the other passages and stumbling upon the troll, who begins to attack them. Cut back to Galadriel. 𝘓𝘓 stands, not searching. Galadriel, this fortress is ancient. It is almost certain that it has not been touched since the great foe himself was defeated. Are you certain we do not grasp at shadows? If we do, it is to avoid being grasped by the shadow instead. Then we hear the crash and scream of the troll fight. This is a section where I have a huge beef with what was done. This is going to become a theme of me having beef with what is done. Galadriel does not need to be catapulted into the air on a sword to demonstrate fighting prowess, nor does she have to fight the troll single-handedly. You have a whole company of elves, use them. She should fight collaboratively with 𝘓𝘓. I'm not a fight coordinator, but I imagine a situation where Galadriel and 𝘓𝘓 utilize each other to attack the troll from both sides, with other elves providing arrow fire to divert its attention. Perhaps 𝘓𝘓 is saved from imminent doom by a quick move from Galadriel. But when the fight is over, Galadriel is about to begin speaking about continuing the search when she notices 𝘓𝘓 standing over the body of one of her companions. Then we can cut to just outside the fortress, where they have hastily created a cairn over the body of their slain companion. Galadriel has a moment where she weighs the cost of one life against the threat in the east, and turns to 𝘓𝘓. We will make camp and continue search in the morning. Thondir looks hard back at her. You may do so, but I cannot. Galadriel looks back, even harder, clearly torn. And Thondir responds, I wish you luck. Then he leaves to make camp, and we cut to the mark on the orc's head and play Sauron's theme. Quick aside here to say that 𝘏𝘰𝘯𝘏𝘴 is excellent. He's a really, really good composer. He did a great job with the soundtrack. As much as I really don't like this show, I do listen to the soundtrack unironically nonstop. So good job, Bear. Now, the reason I edited this scene the way I did is because now the audience understands why Galadriel is intent on finding this threat, because we have experienced the visions with her. But the characters around her cannot quite grasp it because they have not experienced these visions, nor do they feel the energy that they convey. They just see a noble lady of the Noldor driven to what appears to be extreme ends in pursuit of something that her companions just cannot see as a true threat. We also have adjustments to making Galadriel seem more like a leader. We have changes to some very clunky dialogue. One of my main beefs with this scene is when Thondir says, "What devilry is this?" Like he's like some like sultry like dude trying to be like seductive. It's weird. It should be delivered with fear and awe, not cheekiness. We also have another example of Galadriel being so quick to jump to her next thing that she doesn't notice that something has gone wrong. When they finish the troll battle, she is about to start speaking and perhaps does start speaking when she suddenly notices that everyone else is already looking over the body of her dead companion. Again, she's not just an asshole, she's just driven by something that is causing her to not be as good of a leader as she could be. We don't hate her, but we understand that she's flawed. Then, we cut to the title. The other arcs of the episode that we need to address are the Harfoots, Elrond and Lindon, which, to nitpick, is a realm, not a city, and then Arondir's arc in the Southlands, which is just Mordor. The show chooses to cut from the title screen to the Harfoot story, so that is where we will go. The first scene with the Harfoots appearing is actually a bit delightful in my opinion. I'm not convinced you need a Hobbit story in this show at all, and in fact I think it's fairly certainly contrived to cash in on the success of previous adaptations. But it's at least fun to watch this first scene where the little hobbits appear from hidey holes. It does, however, add another thread that we need to tie together with the other main arcs of the series, which is an added challenge I'm not sure is worth the cash grab. It also takes time away from the time we can spend with the characters that actually matter. I don't mind the dialogue between the hunters. It's a fine way of introducing the name Harfoot. In fact, the funny part of this is that the least relevant story to the entire overarching plot is the best written part of this episode. Apart from some of the dialogue between Nori and Poppy, we can change a little bit of that, but for the most part, it's the best parts of the episode. So there will be a theme here of me not really changing much about the Harfoot stuff. The one thing I will change is when Poppy face plants in the mud puddle, rather than the weirdly out of place enchanting that she says, which I think is just doesn't quite feel right. I imagine that we could have a little back and forth that establishes their relationship a bit more. So Poppy is pulled from the fence and face plants, lifts up her head and says, "Why is it that on all your adventures I'm the one ends up covered in mud?" And Nori responds, "Because I'm always the one dragging you out of trouble. And fences." Overall, though, this scene is fine, which is almost frustrating because, again, this is the least important story in the show. Then we will jump into Harold Elrond. Elrond is an incredibly important character to this series, which should be exploring how Galadriel and Elrond became the pinnacles of elvendom that they are in the Third Age, and how they contributed during the creation of and war over the Rings of Power. To that end, Amazon have decided to make Elrond an up-and-coming political advisor / speechwriter for Gil-galad, the High King of the Noldor. When Elrond is introduced as a character, he's approached by some attendants who inform him that for some reason he can't join a council of some sort, and that Galadriel has returned. The main issue here is that the character should be well aware of the high stature and noble birth of Galadriel, and would not introduce her as your friend. If the goal of this scene was to establish that Elrond and Galadriel are friends, and that she is his future mother-in-law, which I think they probably forgot about in this show, it is sufficient to have Elrond's face light up when he hears that she has arrived. We see Elrond pondering over the wording of a speech dedicating some new ships. The attendant approaches. "Herald Elrond, I am to inform you that the High King requests his speech be finished by morning." "And he will have it." My lady Galadriel has also returned and awaits you in the gardens. The king wishes to speak with her. Why did you not say so at once? Then we have a scene where two friends are reunited after a supposedly long time and discuss a grave danger to the world. I'm not sure what kind of relationship they were trying to establish here, but I think that Elrond should look up to Galadriel, considering her age and heritage, and Elrond should be open to the reality of Sauron, though not exactly accepting of it. He should enter this conversation with Galadriel confident that Sauron is gone, but should leave with the feeling that just maybe there is something to what she discovered. The problem with the dialogue in these two scenes is that it's kind of shallow. These are two incredibly wise thinkers discussing a complex problem. This should be a conversation of two minds who respect one another, not a petulant child being chided by a patient adult. Once the pleasantries are dispensed with, Galadriel would try to explain her plight to Elrond, trusting that he might understand. Galadriel stares at a depiction of Valinor. She should be torn because we know in the show that she desires to protect the lands of Middle-earth and fears that the doom of all creatures lies growing somewhere in the east, though some part of her still misses her home. Galadriel, by the light of Elbereth, you have returned unharmed. You fear for naught, my friend. They embrace, and there is a moment of eye contact, but Galadriel struggles to smile. She turns back to the depiction of Valinor. What is it like, Valinor? There are no words in any tongue to properly describe it. It is the feeling of returning after a long journey, the cool calm of a starlit night, the joy of song, the warmth of close kinship. It is home. Galadriel continues to stare at the painting. What troubles you, my friend? An evil stirs in the dark corners of the world. And what has led you to such a grand conclusion? In the wastes we found another of the sigils. Galadriel hands him a parchment with a symbol on it, and a 𝘏𝘧𝘏𝘓 caption that says, found on the corpse of an orc mutilated by dark sorcery. And this is enough to know that evil has returned. No, there is more. I have seen it. Elrond, I have seen it in my waking mind. A shadow, burning, screams, death, Eregion in ruins, the land scarred and choked with ash. You have seen this? It is in my mind always, a creeping dread that threatens to swallow my very spirit. Elrond looks ponderously at the symbol and thinks for a while. Conflict is on his face. I will show this to the king, though you know his heart. I do. In his wisdom he imagines all swift action to be folly. There is a time for patience, but I fear our enemy knows patience as well. By delaying, we may only hasten our destruction. Elrond begins to lead her out of the gardens. Let us go. He wishes to speak with you, and perhaps he can be swayed. But be careful with your words, Galadriel. There is no swifter way to turn one from your cause than to insist that they know nothing at all. We can end the scene there, setting up a replacement for the terrible ceremony scene with a far more intimate scene between Galadriel, Elrond, and Gil-galad. Then we cut back to the Harfoots. This scene, there's a conversation between Nori and her father. It's cute, it's fine, I'm not really going to change much. Then she has a conversation with her mother. It's also cute and fine. I just don't know why it needs to be here. It'd be better if we got rid of it and spent more time with everybody else. Moving on. We're back in Lindon. The purpose of this scene is to establish more of the tension between Galadriel's feeling about Sauron and the other elves being like, no, it's all chill, we're good. I think this could be better accomplished with a more intimate scene rather than this strange, coronation type scene. So this is what I have. Galadriel and Elrond enter Gil-galad's throne zone, or wherever Amazon has decided to put him in Lindon. I think a very nature-inspired throne room would look really cool, and perhaps the throne is actually sculpted from the base of the roots of a large tree. That'd be pretty cool. But anyway, Gil-galad stands to greet them. My king, Galadriel has returned. I am delighted to see you safe, Galadriel. I have much to discuss with you. Please, sit. They all sit at a table laid with delicious food and drink. I have heard much of your journey from your company. It is a grave tragedy to have lost one of our own on such an errand. It is heavy on my heart, though a mere errand this was not. Elrond stops smiling, concerned by the tone Galadriel is already taking. Indeed not. This was a search for remnants of the great foe, of which I am told you found little but ruined fortresses. Is this not what we hoped to find? Ruined fortresses and dark craft, Another of the sigils. She indicates to Elrond, who looks uncomfortable, but produces the parchment and hands it to Gil-galad, who reads the paper casually. I understand this sigil has great significance to you, and be assured that we all of the House of Finarfin grieve the loss of your brother, our kin. Yet I am not surprised that marks of sorcery may be found in ancient places of evil. Would you consider this proof that the enemy is here? When all his legions are gone, orcs have not been seen in centuries, and even the men beyond the mountains who joined with the enemy have settled into a cycle of peace and monotony? Then we snap to a sudden snippet of Galadriel's vision. I want this to be jarring, sharp, evil, scary almost. I want the audience to feel what Galadriel feels. That way, this next response makes sense. Would you see all of Eregion burned to ash? Gil-galad and Elrond will fall silent. Would you see the peoples of this land fall under a new shadow? Would you see a flaming hand crush Lindon, lay waste to the havens? This is what I have seen. Gil-galad and Elrond should both look thoughtful. This would be concerning, as foresight is not a new phenomenon to elves, though it is somewhat rare. I would not. You know this, Galadriel. Neither would I make my decisions based on fear. We must look at what our senses show us. The lands are safe. The enemy is gone. I cannot force my people into turmoil because you claim to have seen our doom. My king, Galadriel wants only to caution our decision-making. She fears that in our patience we may allow the enemy to grow. And would you have the 𝘏𝘪𝘯𝘨 spend another 1,000 years hunting something that may not exist? Would you take the time of peace we have finally earned and squander it on a quest which may come to nothing? I would have you save our people. Our people have been saved. They have been saved from the last time we made the error of embarking on a fruitless quest. I know your pain, Galadriel, but do not let this fear guide your actions. With these words mirroring what Finrod told her at the beginning of the episode, Galadriel will sink into deep thought. Thank you for the audience, my king. Elrond and Galadriel leave. Gil-galad watches them go, and then looks at the sigil on the parchment. Then he throws the parchment into a brazier, and we watch as the sigil is the last part of the parchment to be consumed by the fire. I think this scene establishes the same kind of tension they were attempting to create with the weird coronation scene, but it accomplishes making Gil-galad less of a dick. Again, there's so many characters in this show that they're kind of just assholes, and it's a shame because we should relate to these characters. You should have people who disagree that the audience feels like they are relating to both of them. That's what creates such a great, tension. That is an example of, of what creates good television. To compare this show to House of the Dragon, which, again, it's not a perfect show, but in terms of writing quality, leagues better. There are many characters in House of the Dragon that you relate to that are at odds with one another, and it creates this tension where you don't know who to vote for, or you do, but you still kind of are unsure, and that is great television. If every character is just terrible, you don't relate to anybody, and the show becomes kind of just not fun to watch because everyone is bad on screen. And so we have Gil-galad here not just being mean. Instead, he is a king who's trying to do what's right for his people. He's afraid of what happened before after the Kinslaying, when a decision was made that caused nothing but doom for the Noldor. He doesn't want to follow another, choice made out of fear and anger into potential detriment to the entire society of the elves. He has a very difficult position here. Galadriel, at the same time, also has a very strong position, which we sympathize with as the audience because we have seen these visions. But we have two wise people discussing alternate sides of a situation who can't quite understand the other person's side, but both have a point. And that is the kind of dialogue you look for in something like this, where intrigue and intelligence is a main facet of these, this race of creatures. The next scene is another debate between two friends, though this one now has the intense fuel of Gil-galad not heeding the warning from Galadriel. The problem we run into now is that Galadriel is supposed to get on a ship going to Valinor, which would never have happened, as the High King of the Noldor does not have the right to decide who gets past the ban of the Valar. Galadriel has already refused her one chance back at the beginning of the Second Age. The only purpose of her going to to Valinor on a ship is, 1, to give her a moment of choice where she turns away from one main thing that she desires to seek Sauron instead, and 2, to have her meet Halbrand and end up in Numenor. Can we accomplish these two things without using this terrible setup of a gift of a trip to Valinor? In reality, we shouldn't accomplish this at all. Like I said in the beginning, Tolkien Untangled has a great description of how this show could actually play out that much more accurately follows the lore. Spoiler, Galadriel never went to Numenor. However, in keeping with my original intent, I must find a way to achieve these goals without her being given a chance to return to Valinor like it's some sort of resort vacation. Later, after nightfall, Elrond finds Galadriel back in the gardens, this time looking at the statues of fallen elves, her brother among them. He brings 2 chalices of 𝘓𝘰𝘣𝘍𝘍. Perhaps this will ease you. Galadriel accepts the 𝘓𝘰𝘍𝘍, but looks back at the statue of her brother. I have seen so much death. My family was destroyed by Morgoth. My brother was killed by Sauron. And yet I cannot accept this peace. I would wish nothing more than to move forward, but the weight of the past anchors me here. I have seen my share of death, and I understand the weight of grief. I watched my brother age and die. I will not claim to know your pain, Galadriel, but I know that you are my friend, and I want only for you to be content. I want to go home, Elrond. I have carried this sorrow for so long. But we cannot go home. The Valar barred our way long before I was born. Centuries ago I was given a chance, and I refused it. I have often wondered if I made the right choice. I think now that perhaps I did not. That choice has been made. All that remains for you to decide is what you will do now. And what if I chose to make that voyage, like your father? Then you would surely perish. Galadriel looks at Elrond and then looks back at her brother. Yes, you are right. But here I am, casting a pall on a reunion with a dear friend. Let us drink. She forces a smile, and they drink the 𝘓𝘍𝘍 and chat a bit as we cut to the map shot. The point of this scene is that Galadriel makes a choice. She suggests perhaps she'll make the voyage to Valinor. Elrond says, you'll surely perish, which is true. Many elves did attempting to make that voyage. Earendil was the one that made it, Elrond's father. But perhaps Galadriel does not want to spend time in this world and would rather attempt to make the journey or perish trying. At the end of this conversation, Elrond may believe that Galadriel has chosen to let it go, but Galadriel has made a choice, which we will see come to fruition later. Then we have the introduction of the Southlands, which is Mordor. The introduction of the Southlands is good. Everyone was quite concerned about an elf of color, but so far in this show, Ismael Cruz Cordova is the only elf that really feels elvish. Arondir has that ephemeral air and cool patience that I imagine a timeless being would have. Arondir's introduction is fine, though I think the tension between him and the locals is a bit overplayed. You could get the message across without the sudden silence in the bar. Instead, the following glares and hushed whispers as the sound of the alehouse continues would be enough to insinuate that he is not exactly welcomed by a portion of the population. The scene with the kid being racist is also a bit over the top. Subtlety tends to be better for implying tensions, in my opinion. We want to imply this tension and also set up Arondir's character to grow into the middleman that tries to ease the tension between elves and men in the Southlands. We want to see him question his job patrolling these people. Arondir enters a tavern to the sounds of laughing and talking. As he walks through, gazes follow him, and some of the watchers whisper amongst themselves. He approaches the barman, who greets him. "Greetings, Earendil. Has it already been a fortnight?" "It has." "Nothing to report, I'm afraid. Quite calm around these parts of late." "No strange travelers, no men from the east?" No, not that I've seen nor heard of, though we appreciate you taking an interest." "Do we?" Arondir and the barman turn, and silence falls. "I'm not sure that I do appreciate you taking such an interest, elf." "The interest I take is for your own sake." "Is it now? You would protect me from my ancestors. Do you imagine they'll climb from their graves and lay waste to our village? I know who you think we are." "I do not seek to protect you from your ancestors." "No, you seek to protect yourselves from us, now don't you?" Do we need to? Not if you leave us be. We've no need of your minding. The grudge you folk harbor is your problem, not ours. He goes back to drinking with his friends. The sounds of the bar resume. Earendil pauses thoughtfully before turning back to the barman. Then I shall be back in a fortnight. Send word if you are in need. Certainly, and don't mind him, he's just had a bit much to drink. Earendil should say the following thoughtfully and almost to himself in a whisper. Perhaps. This accomplishes introducing this tension, and also shows Earendil already beginning to question why he is here. The elves are watching over these people because they believe that the blood of the unfaithful still stays strong after so long a time. Earendil maybe is starting to see that perhaps times really have changed. And this, I think, is a great tension and character arc for him as he becomes the middleman between these people. He starts, as an elf, and then starts to realize that maybe the elvish way of looking at these things isn't quite right, and Bronwyn can be one of the forces of that transformation. Then we have to introduce this love interest, which should also not exist, but again, I have chosen to make myself suffer in the interest of demonstrating that even this fan fiction could have been interesting with some tweaks to the writing. Bronwyn is a healer, and Earendil, if he is a watchman, would likely be interested in seeing what she is up to if people in the town are ill or injured. This would explain why he's seen so much of her and why he leaves the tavern and heads to the healing house, or Bronwyn's house, or whatever, wherever she does her healing, but I think a healing house is the best idea. Earendil crosses the town and enters a low building with a garden out front filled with colorful herbs and flowers. Inside, he passes through a beaded curtain into a room covered in drying herbs, ceramic pots, scales, and parchments. The floor has several cots spread out, but only one is taken, by a man in a blanket, coughing occasionally. Bronwyn is mixing herbs to create a tincture. Earendil approaches her, unheard with his elven lightness. What ails the man? Gods, you cannot creep up on a woman like that. She is like to defend herself. My apologies, I did not mean to startle you. Oh, he'll be fine, he's got a chill. If you ask me, he's a bit of a baby. They share a smile. Bronwyn goes back to mixing the tincture and starts asking Earendil to hand her items. Hand me that. Do they all hate us? Do you hate all of them? Earendil nods thoughtfully. I don't know that we should, yet to us the memory of Morgoth and the men who fought with him remains as fresh as though it were yesterday. Is it easier to forgive when you know you have only a short time to live? I've known many a human who's taken a grudge to their grave. It seems it's not a uniquely elvish problem. She points to more things for Earendil to grab for her throughout this conversation. We can sense Earendil's inner turmoil. Then, Bronwyn's son comes into the room down a set of 2 squeaky steps. Earendil quickly straightens up and says, Good, if all is well, I shall return in a fortnight, and then quickly leaves, making no squeaks on the steps. Theo's glance follows him, and then he looks to his mother, who quickly averts her gaze and goes back to working. This scene accomplishes the exposition of why these elves patrol the town, establishes the relationship between these two as a more deep and trusting one than any of the other members of the town, and creates the tension for Earendil's character as he wonders if what he is doing is truly necessary or if his people harbor a grudge that must be let go. This is based on one of the deep themes of Tolkien's work, and in fact the primary theme of the Second Age, the dichotomy between death and deathlessness. The elves hold a grudge because they were there when these men's ancestors killed their kin. They do not have the clear delineation of generations to separate the men who fought with Morgoth from their ancestors. Men, on the other hand, can't even remember the time when that happened. It is an ancient past to them, and they can't fathom why they would be held responsible for the sins of their ancestors. By the way, separate note, what elves are these supposed to be? Were they even involved in the 𝘓𝘰𝘳𝘥? Why do they care about the unfaithful? And why are they beholden to Gil-galad, the king of the Noldor? It makes sense for this show to make them Noldor rather than Sylvan, in my opinion, but whatever. The next scenes should establish the elven side of this controversy, and should serve to place more tension on Earendil, reminding him of the tragedies that occurred in the 𝘓𝘰𝘳𝘥, and muddying the conclusion he thought he was coming to after his experience in the town. Leaving the town, Earendil reconvenes with his partner Maedor. All is well, then? It appears so. None for us to be wary of? None. They cross the bridge out of town. I did not much like the glances we were given as we left. Would you care for men who entered your home with suspicion? Do you think us wrong to be cautious with the blood of the unfaithful? I think that perhaps we underestimate the power of time to wash away that blood. Has time washed away the blood of our kin who were slain before Morgoth's fortress, as the men they trusted destroyed them from within? Has it eased the rest of their souls in the timeless halls? We have seen the power of blood, and though men forget quickly how it guides their actions, we see the patterns. We know its weight. I grieve for our kin, Maedor, but is it not possible that this weight is a thing of our own making? Is it not possible that you are swayed by another force? You are not so cunning as to avoid my eyes. I know with whom you meet. Forget this thought, and let us return to us, Tirith. He walks ahead, and Eärendil follows a moment behind. We already now understand the conflict that Eärendil is feeling. Maedor has a point. The ancestors of these men killed the people they care about, and elves do have the benefit of time to see the patterns of how blood does affect people as generations move on. Do people tend to follow the patterns of their ancestors? If they do, elves would have seen that. And we get the sense that Maedor knows what's going on between Eärendil and Bronwyn, and, we already start to doubt that maybe Eärendil's tension here really just comes from him being love-struck. But as he develops, we will see that he is in a complex situation and will have to deal with it as a human, for lack of a better word, because that's what we're going to relate to, but in reality he's going to deal with it as an elf. In the next scene, they arrive at Ostirith and enter to a great ruckus. We're going to skip the stupid elf-woman pair dialogue. Nobody cares. We already understand it's forbidden based on the previous two scenes. As they enter the outpost, there is singing and drinking and food. What is this festivity? Another elf approaches them. Eärendil, Maedor, have you heard? Heard what? We are returning home. The watch is disbanded. The High King sent word earlier today. Disbanded? We depart in the morning. Come, sing with us. And then he rejoins the song that is happening in the background. There you are, Eärendil. Your desire has come true. We need not watch the unfaithful any longer. He pats Eärendil on the shoulder and joins the party. Eärendil stands conflicted. He no longer has to watch over a people he isn't sure need watching anymore, but he must also leave Bronwyn. After a moment of thought, he turns and leaves the outpost. In the next scene, Bronwyn is at her home with her son preparing a meal. A knock arrives, but at the back door. Who knocks at the back door? Stay here. It is Eärendil. She opens the door and then quickly steps through the crack, closing it behind her and pressing herself against it. You are at my home. I am sorry. I had to come. Bronwyn awaits an explanation. We are leaving tomorrow. Leaving? We are to depart the lands and go home by order of our king. Very well. I don't see why you needed to arrive at my home uninvited to tell me this. Do you not? Why must our fortune be so? The power that shapes this world acts in ways we cannot comprehend, but I despair at this fate. Theo opens the door. Mother! He sees her very close to Eärendil and sees tears in her eyes. He looks back at Eärendil with a glare, protective. Someone is at the door. The front door. Bronwyn wipes her tears quickly and passes through the house without looking back at Eärendil. She arrives at the front of the house where a man is standing. Oh, I'm sorry to bother you, Bronwyn, but have you seen Elwith any time today? No, I haven't. Where is he? He went to Hordern to visit a friend, but he's not returned. Is it possible? How long has he been gone? The man hesitates and looks at Bronwyn, then looks back at Eärendil. 3 days and nights now. He's normally back the second day. Hordern, you said. I can be there before daybreak. He goes to depart. Bronwyn is seen talking to the man, reassuring him, and then catches up to Eärendil. You are no longer tasked with our protection. I'm not certain I ever was. So why do you go now? Eärendil turns to her. Because our past does not have to dictate our present. He turns and walks away again. She pauses, and then catches up again, walking beside him. Don't you need to take care of your son? He's nearly grown. If he can't take care of himself yet, he'll be better for needing to. As they both travel the path out of town, they each smile to themselves, secretly happy to have found an excuse to be together. This series of scenes, I feel, does a much better job of setting up Eärendil as a relatable character in a bit of a pickle, if we're honest. He's in a bit of a pickle, and he has good reasons to relate to both sides. The elves have a reason to be disbanding. Eärendil has a reason to stay, just to find an excuse to be with Bronwyn. Bronwyn has an excuse to be with Eärendil. They're both kind of happy and a little bit flirtatious about it, even though it's, not a great situation. They're kind of searching for a missing kid. Theo has reason to be protective of his mother and a reason to kind of dislike Eärendil. In general, I think these scenes do a better job of setting everything up. They even set up Bronwyn to have a bit of a character. She is a healer. We actually see her doing healing things, which I don't think we've seen so far in the entirety of the Rings of Power show, even up to episode 6. So we see her doing healing things. We see her demonstrating some wisdom, and we'll see more of that a little bit later. And we start to see her intelligence, which is very important, because we want her to be a real character, which she kind of isn't right now. I think a lot of new media has a problem with writing female characters where they attempt to make them powerful by making them less human and kind of just telling you that they're powerful. When in reality, I think what makes a good and powerful female character is the same thing that makes a good and powerful character. Relatability, fallibility, an arc that we can relate to and feel, ourselves getting lost in, decisions we can, we maybe don't like or do, but decisions that create some sort of emotion within us. They have to be grounded in something that we can feel, which unfortunately Bronwyn really isn't yet. And maybe this gets better in later seasons, but right now I'm not feeling it. All right, now we have the scene with Theo's sword that he's found in some undisclosed barn. Is this his family's barn? Whose barn is this? Who has this sword hilt just laying around? It's possible that later in the season they'll reveal whose house this was, which by episode 6 they still haven't. But why not reveal it now? I can't imagine it matters too much whose house it is, unless it's Theo's house and the sword belongs to his dad, and that's the big reveal. Cue the Adar is Theo's dad theories. However, we do need to introduce this sword and also establish that Theo is unaware or unwilling to believe his mom's entanglement with Eärendil. Again, this kid character is played so much like an asshole. Why would Theo be his friend? I'd like to make him a little more friendly, just aware of more talk of the town than Theo, perhaps. Theo and his pal run through a field into a barn. As they quickly close the door behind them, Theo starts looking for a board in the floor. Why were you looking in Cratchit's barn anyway? This is why. He lifts up a floorboard and brings out a jar of thick honey. Old Salt's been hiding this from everyone. He takes a finger and eats it. Gods, I see why. This is incredible. You think that's good? Look at this. He pulls out a wrapped bundle that clanks onto the floor between them. He slowly unpeels the wrapping to reveal the sword hilt. His friend reaches for it wide-eyed. Hey, don't touch it. Finders keepers, I say. Fine, but let's see you hold it. They're interrupted by a noise and scramble to put the floorboard back. Theo grabs the bundle and his friend grabs a jar of honey and they run out the door. On the way back toward the town center, they chat. Is it true about your mum? What about her? Word is she's been mighty sweet with one of the elves. Side note, why do we have to have like a racial slur for elves? I feel like elf is enough. If you don't like the elves and everyone just says elf, it's probably going to be not great. So yeah, Rowan says, word is she's been mighty sweet with one of the elves. Whose word is that? Well, everyone's really. It's not true. He should look thoughtful, though, as we know from previous scenes that he has his own suspicions. Maybe that's why your dad up and left. My dad didn't up and leave. All right. Well, what happened to him then? I don't know. I don't want to talk about this. They reach the town center and Theo breaks off, heading toward his home. This scene makes Rowan less of an asshole. It makes sense that Theo and Rowan are friends. Rowan's just kind of a kid. He just sometimes says shit that, maybe you didn't think about before you said it. It sets up why they were in the barn in the first place, because who's just running around barns picking up floorboards? Unless there might be a secret stash of honey there that you might like. And then accidentally then stumble upon some weird sword hilt that maybe just ended up there. Again, this is just episode 1. Later on, I'd explain why this sword hilt ended up in this house, but because I don't know what Amazon intends to do with it, and I'm trying to rewrite Amazon's show instead of coming up with an entirely new one, we're going to just have to leave it as it is. Now we move on to the next scene with Galadriel. Galadriel on a boat, motherfuckers. We arrive now at the one time that I am going to deviate quite greatly from the way this episode was originally written. As explained before, Gil-galad has no right to tell elves they can go home, and even casual viewers will be confused why the elves are even out here experiencing tragedy if they can just leave whenever. Valinor sounds great. Why don't they all just go? As a result, my rewrite has Galadriel choosing to steal a boat and attempting to make the journey herself like Earendil did so many centuries before. I am going with the canon that Galadriel refused the pardon to return to Valinor at the end of the First Age, rather than the one in which she was excluded from it, although both technically are accurate to what Tolkien wrote. The reason for this choice, to reiterate, is that the point of her going to Valinor, story-wise, is 1. To end up on Numenor and meet Halbrand, and 2. To make a choice that drives her character arc. In Amazon's case, it was to keep fighting to find Sauron instead of going home. In my case, it's that she chooses to try to go home to escape her visions, but ends up on Numenor because she makes a small step toward controlling her visions by trying to follow the advice that Finrod gave her so long ago, which I will explain later. As such, I'm going to replace her entire boat to Valinor scene with 2 scenes. One in which she steals a boat from the Havens using her cunning, and one in which she attempts to make the journey to Valinor alone. First, we will have the boat theft. We reveal Galadriel entering the harbor at the Havens. Elves are at work preparing for voyages of pleasure and to move supplies between the various parts of Lindon that are on waterways. Galadriel walks up to an elf worker unpacking a ship as he removes some of the last supplies. "My Lady Galadriel, I had not heard of your coming. Does Lord Círdan know you've arrived? I'm sure he would desire to speak with you." "I will speak to him presently, though I must say I am delighted by this ship. Who crafted this?" "This is a work of apprentices under the tutelage of Lord Círdan himself. It is beautiful, is it not?" "Quite so. May I?" The elf moves to allow Galadriel to board the ship. "This craftsmanship rivals the work of my kin on the very shores of Valinor. Lord Círdan is a master indeed. Will you inform him of my arrival?" "My lady." He bows and moves off to inform Círdan. As he leaves, Galadriel quickly covers her head with the hood of her cloak and unmoors the ship and sets off. Her departure most likely goes unnoticed, as with her hair covered, she is not instantly discernible, and many ships are coming and going. As she's about to leave the harbor into the Gulf of Lune, she hears shouts on the docks. We see her look back for a moment, and then look toward us, past the camera, determined. This is setting up her reason for being on a boat in the first place, because we've cut out the stupid coronation speech scene, and we've cut out her being gifted a Royal Caribbean cruise line ticket to Valinor. This next scene with Elrond and Gil-galad is to establish Elrond as an up-and-coming politician struggling with leadership and friendship, which mirrors his conflicts between believing Galadriel and believing what he and his king see in the world. We've established Elrond hearing Galadriel's side of the conflict before the throne room scene. This is now an opportunity to see Gil-galad's side of the conflict, as well as to set up Elrond heading to Eregion, even though he was not really there until the War of the Elves and Sauron had already begun. Regardless, let's attempt to do this in a way that deepens Elrond's character, gives Gil-galad a reason to be the way he is, and gives Elrond a reason to go to Eregion. Again, just want to point out here, do you notice this giving both sides of a topic situation here? This is something that I think creates excellent tension for a character. If you only show one side of something, you don't understand why the other people behave the way they do, and they just seem insufferable. If you don't show why Gil-galad feels the way he does, he just seems stupid. If you only make us relate to Galadriel and don't understand why someone else would think anything else, we're just going to be like, why are all these idiots in Galadriel's way? Which is a terrible way to set up characters. Anyway, moving on. Elrond enters Gil-galad's throne zone, and Gil-galad stands admiring the sea. "My king, do you know why she fled?" "Of whom do you speak?" "Galadriel. She has taken a ship from the Havens and departed. I had hoped you could tell me why." "I cannot say, my king, though at our last meeting she seemed troubled. Grief is a singularly powerful emotion. It can bring even the mightiest to their knees. I fear Galadriel may be succumbing. I am not sure. She has reason to be aggrieved, in many ways more than any of us, but she is convinced, and I do not think her foolish.
Nor do I. To deny her wisdom would be ignorant, but even the most wise cannot see all paths. She sees a future, but it may be one of many. Prescience is no small thing, but rash action may lead to ruin. And what if no action is worse? I cannot deny that part of me finds her conclusion compelling. Gil-galad pauses to think. It is hard to say. We cannot forget that swift action and strong emotion are the reasons we left our home, the reasons we nearly fell at Morgoth's feet. Elrond looks thoughtfully out to sea. Seeing this, Gil-galad continues. Leadership is the constant balancing of scales. On one side of the scale is Galadriel, her sight, and scant evidence but for these sigils spread throughout the lands. On the other, we see a land devoid of Morgoth's servants, centuries of peace, and the memory of the last time we did not pause to consider the consequences. How can one balance such a scale when so much is at stake? I wish that there was a clear answer to that question. Alas, it is the burden of a leader to make what choice he will, and to bear the weight of its consequence. Let us speak of other matters. I have a task for you. A task, my king. You have doubtless heard of the Lord 𝘏𝘓𝘃𝘓𝘏, the greatest jewelsmith since Feanor himself, of course. He has requested assistance from one versed in diplomacy, and I have decided that it will be you who answers this call. Thank you, my king. I am honored to accept this task. Excellent. You will leave tomorrow, and Elrond, set your heart at ease. Once a decision is made, it is best to let it take its course unhindered. This allows us to see Gil-galad's wisdom, and to see that he doesn't just hate Galadriel. He just doesn't see her evidence as enough to justify making this large-scale decision, which makes sense. And we see Elrond struggling with this dichotomy of making strong decisions, doing what's right, and the people he cares about, which is a challenge of leadership. It's something anyone can relate to, anyone who's had any leadership experience whatsoever. We're back to the Harfoots. Again, this is going to be a theme. I'm really not going to change much of these characters in the first episode or two until they get to their psychopath phase. Then I might kind of change some stuff. This scene is redundant. It's really just for Sadok to say that there's a meteor coming because later a meteor comes. It's fine. It's cute enough dialogue. It can stay, I guess. We return to the Southlands. This is the big reveal that evil has arrived in the Southlands. I want Bronwyn's patience and wisdom to shine through here as she helps Arondir better understand his conflict. Arondir and Bronwyn arrive near the town of Holdern. As they approach a steep hill, they are talking about Holdern. The people of Holdern were those whose ancestors were the quickest to betray their friends. Their kin slayed mine in a land long forgotten. I was born in Holdern. Those are my kin. Do you fear I will slay you? I do not. In truth, I do not fear that any from Holdern will slay me, but I cannot speak for many I know. And why don't you fear me? Because you are kind and gentle and beautiful. Bronwyn blushes a bit, but then refocuses. And aside from my beauty, how do you know that I am kind and gentle? Because I have spoken with you and learned your mind and heart. I see. In this, at least, we have failed. A chance has not been given to your people to show their new nature. As Arondir says this, they reach the precipice of the hill and see Holdern ablaze. They look at each other and quickly rush down the slope. In this, we see Bronwyn helping guide Arondir toward a conclusion. She is providing that kind of bounce-off point that people need to get through their thoughts, the kind of thing that a significant other or best friend provides for you. The, hey, have you thought about it this way kind of thing? And I think that really helps point out, one, her intelligence and her wisdom, to be able to help an elf get through a complex situation, indicates some real wisdom there. Even an elf who's probably fairly young, as I sense that Arondir is in this show. And I think it's important that we do that because, again, as I said, Bronwyn doesn't really have a character in the show, which is a shame because she could be a really interesting character.
Galadriel on a boat, part 2. Okay, now we get to the cool stuff. Galadriel is on this boat that she has stolen, and she makes for Valinor to attempt a voyage that only one has ever made before. Earendil the mariner, who now shines aloft with a 𝘓𝘰𝘣𝘯𝘨𝘴 on his brow. We jump in with her manning a ship solo, displaying her maternal heritage, that 𝘏𝑪𝘯 blood really coming through here. She enjoys the sea, and we have a moment of levity as seabirds flock to her ship, soaring around. We see a genuine smile on her face, but the seabirds fly away aftward. She follows them with her vision and then turns to see why they left. Her smile slips from her face as she sees ahead of her a raging tempest. Sharp cut to her in the storm, struggling to stay afloat. Waves lash at the ship, howling wind tears at the sails, driving rain cuts across her face. She scrambles from bow to stern, tightening ropes lashing down supplies, and generally trying not to die, as many elves who made the journey before have. She seems to be making a good job of it, until she looks to port, and sees an enormous rogue wave approaching. As she notices this, a smaller wave knocks her off the ship and she hangs by the edge of the gunwale. Things look grim as she struggles to hold onto the ship. She sees a flash of one of her visions as her fingers begin to slip. More visions fly through her mind and we see her fingers struggle to hold on. The sounds of the storm begin to fade into a high-pitched ringing. Suddenly, we hear the words of Finrod from the beginning of the episode. A foolhardy captain soon loses her way, allowing fears and desires to cloud her mind, only to find herself adrift in a tempest. But a wise captain, who knows herself, will see afar the guiding light. As Finrod says this, the storm clouds clear. A small space opens up, and the light of Earendil shines through. Finrod finishes, and no squall will ever consume her. With these words, she surges into action as the sounds crash back in and the music swells. She takes control of the ship, directing it toward the star, still visible through a break in the clouds. As she does so, she directs herself directly into the oncoming rogue wave. As she rises up the wave, she is nearly pointing at the star. The music swells, and we cut out to a wide shot, an incredible wide shot of her boat traveling almost vertically toward the mariner in the sky. The music crescendos as she closes her eyes and approaches the crest of the wave, which is just beginning to break. Suddenly, her ship crests the wave and begins soaring down at great speed. She struggles to hold on as the ship crashes to the bottom of the wave. The impact sends her flying to the bow, crashing into the gunwale and losing consciousness. This allows us to create an incredible shot for this show. The first and second age of Middle-earth are biblical. Anyone who's read the Silmarillion or any of the grand tales like Beren and Luthien, the children of Húrin, will know that this stuff is biblical, and that grand scale I feel like has not been captured yet in the Rings of Power show. This scene is a killer for lore fans. In terms of seeing the callback to Earendil flying up into the sky, seeing the, her 𝘏𝑪𝘯𝘨 heritage coming through as she pilots this ship, and later on, this is the reason she ends up in Númenor. Coming down the other side of this rogue wave, she is driven at great speed out into the direction of Númenor, where she will, in the next episode, be picked up by a ship after stumbling across a shipwrecked individual, aka Halbrand. Fans of the lore will know that the star Earendil guided the Edain to Númenor when it was originally gifted to them by the Valar. That's why they named their island Elena, which means starward. This is a perfect way for Galadriel to end up in Númenor, even though she's not supposed to. She ends up there the same way the Edain did, by following Earendil. Not only that, but she chooses to follow the advice of her brother by finding the light, choosing to guide herself, and making that little choice brings her to Númenor. Her character arc brings her to Númenor. Instead of her ending up there because she jumped off a boat in the middle of the ocean and happened to get picked up, in this case, her decisions led her there. She intended to go to Valinor, but fate did not have that in mind. And so she ends up in Númenor and ends up meeting a shipwrecked person named Halbrand. Well, folks, we're almost there. Let's talk about the meteor. I don't know why the hell Meteor Man exists or what the point of shoving him into the Harfoot story is besides getting brownie points for, oh look, Gandalf likes the hobbits because they helped him before. That being said, again, I am trying to change as little as possible for the sake of this experiment, so we can have our sweeping meteor shots. The only difference being we don't see one in Galadriel's scene, we only see it from Lindon, the Harfoots, and Hordern. Why are we able to see a meteor that is quite literally landing in Rhovanion streak across the sky eastward in Mordor? No idea. Let's maybe just have them see the impact from afar instead of it streaking across the sky. We're only up to episode 6, so we still have no idea where the fuck the stranger fits into the larger story. So I'm going to leave this scene mostly untouched for now. Again, in my opinion, get rid of this Harfoot nonsense entirely. It just takes away from the time we can spend with important characters. And that's it, guys. That is my rewrite of episode 1. It's a lot of work. You know, I wrote 28 pages here. That's almost a full screenplay for an episode. It's been an excellent experiment for me and good practice for writing. My intent with all this was, again, to do a better job of conveying character decisions through writing, do a better job of conveying motivation through writing, do a better job of driving the story through writing by having the characters drive the story instead of the characters just do stuff because the script says so. The characters have reasons to do the things they do. I'm sure you all will have different ideas about how these things could have been rewritten. I'd be happy to hear them. Please do tell me if you enjoyed what I wrote or if you would change things yourself. And also tell me if it's terrible. If it is, and good to know. I'll go back to the drawing board, rewrite it again, and I'll come back to you later. But thank you guys for watching. I appreciate your time. Like I said, do check out Tolkien Untangled. He has an incredible series of like hours and hours of talking about how this show could have been done, and it is worth every minute of watching because you, like me, will probably feel like those great feelings in your stomach and like goosebumps when you can imagine a great story coming together. So do definitely check that out if you want to see more of a how a show should be done kind of thing versus a let's rewrite it literally kind of thing. But thank you guys again, and maybe I'll see you in the next video.